In other presentations, we've seen culture contrast continua presented in my terminology, which I call dyadic continua. Let's look at why we use this framework and why we need it to help us become interculturally competent. The dyadic continua that I like to analyze to be able to understand and predict potential intercultural conflict, Weaver calls culture contrast continua. Elsewhere, I have combined this terminology with Edward T. Hall's presentation of cultural conflict along chronemics, proxemics, and kinesics. In the latter two, I've added my own paired extremes to the dyads, which were undefined by Hall in his writing. You can see that these basic nonverbal preferences can be culturally determined and can result in intercultural conflict without us even sensing it in our minds, but only feeling it psychologically or subconsciously. These subconscious, uncomfortable situations lead to culture shock and problems with transitioning to another culture. For all of us, it would be good to know what our predominant first culture preference for one or the other side of a dyad we will have in our first culture, because it can be predictive of interpersonal conflict intraculturally inside our own culture. If you correspond to your first culture's preference, as I would in being a typically American monochronic person, then you can predict a few of the challenges that you might expect to have in transitioning to another culture that is polychronic. Just as my own personal preferences of being on time, not touching others, and maintaining a meter or so of personal space was a source of my lack of comfort in Brazil, as anyone can imagine. It is a good idea to know yourself and your own preferences before you travel abroad for this reason, so that you will be able to anticipate culture clashes. There are not just three of these culture contrasts that can be placed on a continuum, but many, and Weaver gives us an extensive list. So while you would expect to conflict with people in your own community, if you differ from their group preferences, the conflict that comes interculturally can also be expected if you are out of sync. Now, that said, you may also feel more comfortable abroad than you do at home due to how much you conflict with your own culture. So be aware of the identity challenges that will result from you fitting in better abroad than you do at home. This is rare, but not unthinkable. Luskin and Kester give us the basis of cultural patterns by defining them for us as stable, roughly similar behaviors that are expected in similar situations. It's easy to understand that these culturally and situationally determined behaviors help you to maintain peace between yourself and others when you follow the unwritten rules. And you can study these rules in books and know how to act for the most part. These cultural patterns are further defined by Lustig and Kester as beliefs, values, social norms, and practices. This definition supports my assertion that culture is a technology for peace. For if we know and understand how our own first culture demonstrates these patterns, and how another culture that we interact with or other cultures, if in an intercultural space, also demonstrate these patterns, then we can predict what might happen in those interactions. This knowledge gives us skills that when we act accordingly, we demonstrate our intercultural competence, using our knowledge of culture to gain experience being effective and appropriate in intercultural situations. So looking into and studying social patterns, we can construct a set of dyads that cultures tend to prefer, defining the extreme pairs. Each category is a single dyadic continuum with strong or weaker typologies along the line of those two extremes. We act along these general tendencies because we have predicted how our Japanese interlocutors will react to our not bowing in their country. Some of the categories are arbitrary and difficult to understand, but the value of the categories we will review are based on their usefulness to you. We will review these in a separate video. No matter what, you will probably develop your own categories for helping you cope with cultural difference. So why not start with some of Weaver's categories, which we'll see in a different video, and which can help us get started beyond what Hall has already provided. It is important to note that these help us insofar as they actually apply and help us predict behaviors. However, while these help us predict, they are not always true. nor are they dialogical or oppositional. They are dyads, and anyone from culture A can be different from culture A in that dyad. Just like any American can be monochronic like me or polychronic like my wife. Knowing that each is different helps anticipate some of the conflicts, though, and therefore lies the peacekeeping and peace-seeking aspect. Also, note that these, therefore, are not essentialists. So not all Americans and British are monochronic. So be aware that we are talking about tendencies and generally expected preferences within the culture and not universalizing behavior by any measure. Once again, this is not binary and not in opposition, just helpful to predict behaviors and help us maintain the peace between us and others. And again, all of these extremes are extremes within the good and acceptable behaviors of good people. They are cultural and in some cases are just simple preferences. And they are only useful insofar as they are applicable and true in that situation. If they make sense to explain what is happening, then you're on to something. If not, move on to something else. I'll create a variety of presentations from a variety of interculturalist views of culture and how it works, and we will pull back the curtain to help us understand that what we previously took for granted about culture. The first place to start is Gary Weaver's Culture Contrast Continuum to get a basic understanding that advances from Hall's chronemics, proxemics, and kinesics dyads. While I use these videos as presentations for the courses I teach on intercultural competence, they are also freely available for anyone to watch. So please feel free to like it or subscribe to this channel as you see fit or to share it. Your feedback is valuable to me to make things clear and make sure that they are clear. And may you find the peace that you are looking for.